Hi everyone, I'm Karina Logan, one of the organizers, and I'm really excited that Erin McKiernan came all the way from Mexico to be with us today. It was a huge ask. I didn't actually expect her to say yes, but I'm so excited that she did and that we made it work. So the reason I was interested in having her come, and that the whole group was, is that she's one of those early career researchers who made it. She has open access ethics, and she got a permanent job at a good university in Mexico. So she's a success story that I think we all kind of aspire to hope that we can be there one day too, that people will support us in our ethics, even if, and make it so that it doesn't interfere with our career progress, and perhaps maybe even helps us a bit, especially right now as funders are starting to require open access. So Erin did her bachelor's, master's, and PhD at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and her degrees are in psychology and physiological sciences. And right now she's in the Department of Physics at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. So I will let her take it from here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Erin.
Thanks so much. So thanks to Karina, who made it possible for me to be here. So I'm super excited, and thanks to all of you for coming. I should probably explain why I'm in the physics department. That just a little explanation of my trajectory. So I did my PhD in physiological sciences in experimental science, ended up doing a postdoc in kind of mathematical, computational sciences, and then now I'm working in the physics department as part of their new program in biomedical physics. So I teach all the courses that have anything bio in the title, but also with the idea of kind of integrating experimental theoretical approaches and the physics and the biomedicine together. So it was a strange trajectory.
I will start you on screen up.
But I'm really excited to be in that department. And I don't know if I should say I'm quite the success story Karina tells me to. So I still have to get tenure, but hopefully next year I'll start that process, and I'm going to cross my fingers that it's successful. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the OpenCon main meeting. This is a satellite of OpenCon. So OpenCon is really the first meeting dedicated to students and early career professionals to teach them all about open access, open data, and open educational resources, open science in general. And so what we do each year is we open it up to applications from all over the world. People fill out an online form saying why they're interested in open, what they're already working on, and their career stage, because we give preference to early career. And so the first year, we got about 1,500 applications, I think. Last year, we had over 10,000 from all over the world. And then we have to narrow that down to about 150 to 200 candidates, and we give them full travel scholarships to come from anywhere in the world. So this year, I think we had 60 countries represented, which is fantastic. We also had especially a small group of representatives from Latin America, so we're hoping to do a regional meeting in Latin America sometime in the following year, so that was very exciting. And this year, what we decided to do was not just have keynotes from established people, but especially have panels from OpenCon alum that were returning, from young researchers that are just starting out, because we want those new perspectives. So that's kind of the idea, and thank you very much for reading our OpenCon Code of Conduct. We worked really hard on that to make it an inclusive environment. So I'm going to kind of go off script today. So I think, I've done enough keynotes with slide decks, and I'm kind of bored of doing keynotes with slide decks. And so what I thought I'd do today is something a little bit more interactive. I'm going to tell you about two projects. One is an article that we published this year all about how researchers can succeed at being open scientists. And the other is an educational project, which is sort of the fun version of the paper with cartoons, with the idea of giving a very visual message, making it exciting, drawing more researchers in, and getting them to learn about open science. So I'm just going to start off with the article. So this is an article we published in eLife called How Open Science Helps Researchers Succeed. And the reason we did this was I'd been to a lot of advocacy events, and a lot of them were directed at librarians and with language that appealed to librarians, and that was great, except that some of that language didn't necessarily appeal to researchers. So when we went to talk to researchers, They really needed to hear a different message, and particularly, although many of them fortunately did buy the kind of ethical and moral arguments for why we should be sharing our research, they also needed to hear that this was something they could do and at the same time be successful. Because we don't want to ask anybody to sacrifice their career for the movement. That's not the point. We want people to be able to share their work and also advance their careers and be successful. So the idea with this article is to kind of put that information together. What is it that a researcher can do? How can they benefit from sharing their work? And can this actually give them an edge in what we know right now is an extremely competitive world of science, right? So here's the eLife article, and I'm using their Lens platform, which is a nice viewer. You can see the articles, you can see the outline, you can see some of the figures. We'll go through those. But I wanted to kind of point out the outline. The idea was to focus on main concerns for researchers. So how many people here are active researchers? Oh, good, yay. Okay, right. So when I asked you guys what's one of your top concerns in terms of being successful in your career, what would you say? And you can just yell it out. Anyone? Nobody has any concerns, we're all good? Okay, well, sorry?
Publications.
Publications, right? And specifically what about publications?
Getting them into the journals.
Getting them into journals and hopefully getting them cited, right? Because that's another thing. When you're building your career, you're trying to build a name for yourself, you want visibility, you want people to read your work, you want people to cite your work. That's how you build your reputation as a researcher. So we focused on publishing as a main concern for researchers. Another one, anyone?
I want my data to be reused by someone.
That's a fantastic one. I want my data to be reused by some. I wish more researchers would say that.
Well, that's why we're here, isn't it?
It's fantastic. No, a lot of researchers aren't concerned about this, but it's going to be increasingly something that they have to be concerned about because, in part, of funder mandates. So funders are saying, if we're going to pay you to gather these data, we want them to be reusable, to be understandable to somebody else, that we can go and reproduce that same experiment. And they're actually requiring people to share. Yeah.
But some people would add the addendum, and I don't. I want to get credit for my data.
That's a big concern.
And
right?
that's actually quite subtle. In other words, they want their career to develop from their data.
Right, and so that is another concern. We hear that a lot in the context of scooping, right? I don't want to get scooped. I don't want somebody to take my data and publish something and then I don't get the credit for that work and I don't get the publication. And I think, we have to acknowledge that those are very real concerns, especially again for early career researchers. As they're moving up, they need to be able to get the most out of the data that they're collecting, get as many publications as they can out of it, and that's okay. We don't want to tell them, you have to be completely altruistic and give everything away and never get credit for it, because that doesn't make sense either. So we did focus on we have a resource management and sharing section. How can you kind of preserve your data, manage your data, share your data in a way that benefits your lab, because you can also go back to old projects and reproduce it very easily instead of spending another year going, oh, what did I do with this, right? But you can show your funders that you have good practices in your lab. Funding, right? So all of us want more money for our labs. We have to have money to keep things running. And increasingly, we're not only seeing that funders are requiring article and data sharing, but they're actually developing special funding mechanisms specifically for open science. So that's an exciting thing to see developing. And then career advancements. Things like, how do I find collaborators? All of those are important. So we kind of broke this down. And so I'll just start with visibility. So let's go down here. So there's a lot of research showing that if you publish openly, you get more citations. And it kind of makes sense intuitively, right? So you have more eyes on your papers, more people able to read it, check out what you're saying, verify that the conclusions are correct, they're checking the figures. They're more likely to cite it. I'm not going to cite a paper I can't read, right? So it makes sense, but we gathered a lot of different studies that were showing that this is not just a small effect. First of all, you can see a very large citation advantage, but you can also see it across disciplines. So let's just check out some of let's see if we can move around here, some of the data, because we like data. And I'm going to go to full screen. So this is a figure we put together. We tracked down several different studies. I'm going to try to go down here. Oh, yeah. And here we're looking at relative citation rate of open access articles to non-open access articles. So a value of 1 means they have roughly the same number of citations. Less than 1, those non-OA articles have more citations. Greater than 1, the OA articles have more citations. And you can see that, and each one of those points is a different study. You can see overwhelmingly, across disciplines, in general, the OA articles, the open access articles, tend to get more citations. And in some fields, this effect is really large. This is not just a tiny effect. But we also see, we've broken it down by applied sciences, life sciences, mathematics, physical science, social sciences. This isn't one discipline that's seeing this citation advantage. It's across disciplines. So this is something that especially is important for up-and-coming researchers. I'm going to put it out there, get more eyes on it, get more visibility, get more citations. This can only be a good thing, right? One of the other things we found, let's just close over here, were several studies that said that open access articles get more media coverage. Again, it makes sense. If those reporters can read those articles, they're more likely to report on it. And then, correspondingly, if you have more media coverage, more people start reading your work, you get more citations. So this is, again, a great thing for visibility. And I just want to move over really quickly because in parallel, while we were kind of putting this article together, I got a flash grant, thanks to Peter Murray Russ for nominating me for that, from the Shuttleworth Foundation to do this project that I call Why Open Research. So this was a fun little site we put together. And the idea here, see if it's loading, yeah. I'm very lucky because my dad is a very talented artist, so he teamed up with me on this project, and the idea was to speak to researchers, but in a very visual, fun way, about how open science could benefit them. So, for example, we're talking about visibility and citations. We put this page together, talking about increasing your visibility. So, be more open, get more citations, page views, downloads, right? So, this is the last thing we want as a researcher. You publish your article, you're all excited about it, and then crickets, right? We don't want that to happen. And open access is a way to get yourself out there and to avoid that, crickets. So here we've got a page all about where people can read about the open access citation advantage, but it's done in a way that's very low barrier to entry, fun, exciting, and if they want more information, they can read that. But if not, they can just go through the bullet points and get the main idea. We have some promotional materials here too. The idea was, events like this are fantastic, but when a lot of us go to scientific conferences, open is not on the agenda, right? And we're not going to be able to get up there and get a slide deck in front of researchers and tell them all about this. So we put together some little cards with cartoons for people to throw on seats and desks and whatever at conferences and hopefully get the word out to more people. So kind of a very fun advocacy exercise here. So let's go back to the article. Publishing. You mentioned getting your articles in the journals. And what's one of the things that people are concerned about with the journals? And I'm going to say one of those words we don't like to hear, especially in libraries, because we know that this metric is not a good one. Impact factor, right? We got to talk about impact factor. Okay, so we got a lot of flack for including this section in the article because people said, look, we know impact factor is a bad metric. It says nothing about the scientific quality of the work. In fact, it correlates most highly with retraction rate, okay? And so this is something that we don't want to encourage people to use, but we got to talk about it. And why? Because a lot of universities are still using this as a metric in hiring, promotion, and tenure evaluations. And while that's still happening, researchers are going to inevitably be concerned about the impact factor of the journal that they're publishing in. I'll just tell a personal story. So a few years ago, I was working at another institution in Mexico, and when I came up for evaluation, I needed to fill out an electronic system. So I entered all my publications and all the things I'd done, and then the system generates an electronic CV for you to submit for evaluations. And so I put all my information in, and it generated the CV, and I realized that one of my publications was missing. Now, I don't have a lot of publications, so one of them missing from the list was huge for me. So I went back and I checked, and I filled in everything again, and I clicked generate, and again, it dropped off the list. So what had happened was, at that university, if the journal that you published in did not have an impact factor, that publication didn't exist as far as evaluations were concerned. It was deleted from the system. So an entire body of work that I had created as a scientist just went away because of a journal metric that had nothing to do with the quality of my science. So I think we can all agree that that should never ever happen. But as long as it does, people are going to be concerned about the IF of the journal. So I think that's something we have to face head on and say, look, we understand that you're concerned about this as an up-and-coming researcher, but there are many ways you can publish openly and still, kind of have that concern about impact factor. So one of those is we found some studies showing that the impact factor of open access journals is steadily approaching that of subscription journals. So we have a lot of journals from PLOS, eLife, other ones that have impact factors in the same range as some of those top subscription journals. The other thing is we want to give researchers choices, right? We don't want to say the only way you can ever publish openly is a gold open access journal. No. There are many ways you can do this. So you can publish in Science and Nature if that's what you think is necessary for your career, and then you can archive an open copy that's free for everyone to read. And that's called the green route, right? And that's a perfectly legitimate route for making your work accessible. And a lot of people don't know that journals like Science and Nature are actually pretty open with their policies. So you can post a preprint. That's a version prior to peer review on any open repository. They don't consider that pre-publication. And 6 months after your publication, you can post an author copy on any open access repository you'd like, including your institutional one or something like Figshare as a personal author, right? So those are options we can give authors. Look, this is a way to be concerned, to share your work, to be open, and yet still be successful, still publish in those journal venues that you think are important. Okay, let's go down here. So we had to talk about impact factor, a necessary evil for the moment. But I'm hoping that in the next few years, what we'll see are reforms in terms of hiring, tenure, and promotion evaluation. So how many people here have heard of SF-DORA, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment? Good. How many people signed? Yay. Okay. We got some signatories. So this is an initiative, and I'll pull it up actually if I can, that came out a few years ago when people wanted to publicly declare that impact factor was a poor metric for evaluating science and that they were no longer going to use this. So you can sign this as an individual, you can sign this as an institution. There's over 12,000 individual signatories. I think there's about 900 institutions. So this is a positive thing. These are institutions saying we are not going to use impact factor in any type of our evaluations. And I hope that we'll see that trend increasing in the next few years. So as a point of action, you can sign this if you agree with the principles. So let's go on to something we hear a lot about open access journals, peer review. So how many people here have heard open access journals have no or poor peer review? Something you hear as a common concern from researchers. And I think this is really a myth that we have to nip in the bud, because do we have problems with peer review? Sure. But this is not exclusive to open access journals. So in the past few years, we've seen a lot of problems with peer review at subscription journals. This indicates we kind of need to change the model. Having just 2 or 3 people deciding whether the world gets to see a scientific body of work, and they do this behind closed doors anonymously, is probably not the best way for scientific communication to proceed, right? But that's independent of the open access issue. That's reform needed in the process of peer review. And so one of the things I think that's interesting about open access journals as well, and Karina and I were discussing this last night, that a lot of open access journals, unlike subscription journals, have an open peer review process. So what they do is you have the article and you publish alongside the article the peer review history. That might be a summary of the peer reviewer's reports, or it might actually be the reports themselves. It might or might not include the names of the reviewers, but the important thing is the content of the review is there. And so if I want to go and check how rigorous that process is, I can go and read those reviews. And I can see, were the criticisms valid? Were they checking the analysis? What were the author responses, and how did they kind of change their article, edit their article to respond to the reviewer concerns? I can see from start to finish the rigorousness of that process. And that's something that currently we can't do at subscription journals. and a benefit for open access journals. And I think the more they open up this process, the more that researchers are gonna be confident that this is a solid process going on. All right, let's see, what other concerns do we have here? Oh, we talked about archiving. So how many people are familiar with the site Sherpa Romeo? Okay, so this is a site where, I wonder if it comes up on the link here. No, it won't. Okay. Well, we'll just check it here. So, Sherpa Romeo is a site where you can type in the name of a publisher or a journal, and you can check what their policies are on self-archiving. So a lot of researchers, when you speak to them and you say, look, you have choices. You can publish where you want, and you can archive openly. They say, I can't do that. That's illegal. Well, it's actually in around 80% of journals allow you to post some version of that article at some point in time. It's not illegal. In fact, explicitly on their website, they say this is okay. And so you can go on here, and so we'll check a journal that has really good practices here, eLife. Shout out to eLife. So eLife is an example of a Romeo Green journal. They allow you to post a preprint prior to peer review. They allow you to post that postprint after peer review process. You can even put the publisher version up, and that's because this is obviously under an open access Creative Commons attribution license. You can do whatever you want with that content. We'll pull up an example that's not so liberal with their policies. A top journal in my field. So you can note the publisher here. This is an Elsevier journal. So you can't archive a preprint. You can't archive the publisher version. And maybe you can put your author version online, but with a lot of restrictions. So some of these journals still haven't caught up to the times, and they need to change their policies. But as researchers, we get to choose whether we publish with those journals or not. Right? So this is a great site for researchers to be able to check the policies on their journals. Anyone heard of Sherpa Juliet? Because if there's a Romeo, there's got to be a Juliet. So Sherpa Juliet is another great tool for researchers. So now instead of checking the journal policies, you can check the funder policy. So we talked about funding being a primary concern. You come to researchers and you say, what does your funder actually require you to do with respect to sharing articles and sharing data? And they say, I have no idea, right? You can go on here and you can type in the name of your funder or even a country and look at all the funding organizations and their policies. So do they require you to publish open access? Under what type of license? Is there an embargo? Do they require you to share your data? Do they have specific requirements about submitting a data management plan with your grant? So these are great tools that researchers can use to check some of these policies and find out what it is they're actually required to do. Okay, I'm going to go back here to the article. And let's talk just briefly about preprints. So we said that some of those, I'm going to close this here and go back to our figures. So some of those journals allow you to post a preprint. How many people have posted a preprint online? Yeah, okay, this is increasing. Yes. All right. So it used to be, when you asked that question a few years ago, maybe one person in the room. Now it's starting to gain popularity, particularly in the life sciences. So physics and mathematics have been doing this for at least 20 years. This is part of their publication workflow, part of their culture. But in the life sciences, that really hasn't been part of the culture. ASAP Bio is this new movement that's been promoting. We have some stickers here that says I post preprints. And so they're really trying to promote the idea that preprints in the life sciences particularly can accelerate scientific communication, can accelerate discovery. For me personally, I've posted preprints and gotten excellent feedback. So in the lead up to publishing this article, what we did was post a preprint on Figshare and put out, which is an open repository, put out a public call for comments. And then we put out a Google Doc, and we allowed people to comment all over that Google Doc. And we got some excellent feedback. And it allowed us to improve that article before submission, and I think then made the whole peer review process go much, much faster, because we'd already had so many eyes on that paper and kind of addressed the major criticisms that the community had as far as the content of the paper. It also allowed us to say, to realize that in certain areas of the paper, we looked a little biased, right? I'm obviously biased in favor of open science, but I wanted this paper to come out as balanced as possible. And so people said, you know, this section doesn't look so balanced. Maybe you could insert references to this and this and this. So preprints, I think, have that advantage for researchers. It's always great to have more feedback, especially before final publication. So we went together and we put together this table that has a number of different options for where people can publish preprints. So archive being the classical example for physics and math and a little bit of quantitative biology. But if you want to publish in the life sciences, we now have bioarchive. And then in the last year, actually, this table is now out of date. Just in the last few months, the Center for Open Science opened up SocArchive for the social science, EngArchive for the engineering, and a lot of other preprint servers for, and a lot of these now are allowing direct submission from the preprint server to a journal. So click, I'm ready, my preprint is ready to go to peer review, click, it's that easy. And I think that's another advantage for scientists. It's making the workflow that much smoother, right? All right, let's keep going here. And let's get to retaining author rights. And I'm going to go back for a moment to our Why Open Research site. And so here, we have a page on taking back control over your research. So as researchers, we like to be able to decide what's done with our work. Yeah. My dad is such a good artist. Yeah. Yeah, so one of the things that we're concerned about is, do I retain my copyright? Do I get to decide who uses my work? Do I have to ask permission from the publisher to reuse my own work? Because that actually does happen, as ridiculous as it may sound. And so this page was all about a fun way of telling researchers how to retain control over their work. The first thing is, do not sign over your copyright. Do not sign that form, that agreement that comes from the publisher that says you are going to transfer all your rights to me. There is no reason for you to do that, right? Now, this page has information on a particular addendum from SPARC, which is an organization in the US that works with a lot of libraries, does a lot of advocacy work in open. And they've already put together a legal addendum that you can submit with your publishing agreement to say, I want to retain such and such rights. Particularly, I want to retain the right to post an open copy wherever I want and to share it with other people. Now, the publishers won't always accept that addendum, but we do have examples where people have negotiated with publishers. These are obviously anecdotal. We don't have numbers on how often this happens, but there are cases in which people have successfully done this. Marco and I, we this year, or last year, published a book chapter, and we negotiated with the publisher. Before we accepted to write that chapter, we said, we want a Creative Commons attribution license on this that says it is open access, we can share it, anyone can share it, anyone can read it. And they said, sure, okay, yeah.
Have you heard of any counterexamples? Because I've never heard anyone sign it and be refused.
Yeah, so I have heard a few people that said they wouldn't accept the addendum as is. We had to go through a few negotiation processes to kind of, refine that agreement. But in all the cases I've heard of, it wasn't just a blanket rejection.
Okay.
We will not negotiate, right? It was, well, we want something a little different. But they were willing to negotiate some rights.
That's been my experience.
And I think that's increasingly happening, especially as they see that authors are getting empowered. They're more interested in their rights now. They're going to increasingly have to accept these. And there's even an engine where you can go and generate one that's customized, and you just send it out to your publisher. Yeah.
Is there any correlation between the magnitude of any article processing charge and how flexible the publisher might be? I mean, you could spend $5,000 on getting an open access article. You'd think that would buy you a lot of flexibility, wouldn't you?
I think you might actually find the opposite.
Well,
No,
I suspected.
I don't know if there are any data on this. I know that there are particular publishers who will remain nameless that are not as flexible with these agreements. So that actually is reflected as well in the policies that they have. They're not flexible in general about how their material, it's the researcher's material.
It's not a matter that you can buy more flexibility,
No.
possibly paying them more.
Well, actually, in a couple cases, so one thing that I really don't like is that some of these hybrid open access journals or some of the more expensive open access journals, what they're doing is they're offering one license, which is a Creative Commons non-commercial. It puts that non-commercial restriction on there.
Still price, doesn't it?
No. That's the cheaper one.
All right.
If you want the fully open access
All right,
Creative
yeah,
Commons
yeah.
attribution license, you have to pay more.
That's
Some publishers, we reached out to Nature and we said, we don't think this is a good policy because you're incentivizing people going for the more restricted license. They did actually take that away. It meant that they moved everything up to the higher APC, but at least now there's no financial incentive to pick the more restricted
Let me
license.
name and shame the American Chemical Society. I'm a chemist. It does.
Peter's very happy that you just named and shamed. Yeah.
Just to note that those publishers who ask authors to sign a non-commercial license, some of them also then get the authors to sign the agreement, so any commercial return, even though officially the author obtains copyright, therefore should get the money, to make sure that the publisher gets the money.
I did not know that. That's very sneaky. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, so it sounds initially like a good idea, right? I, as a researcher, don't necessarily want a commercial entity to repackage my work and sell it off, right? But the problem with that is there are a lot of entities that qualify as non-commercial, that or as commercial, sorry, that you might not realize. So, for example, some educational institutions. And I think we'd all agree that we don't want to be limiting how our scientific work is used in an educational environment. So that's when, or nonprofits, for example, sometimes they even fall under the commercial status and they can't reuse some of this work. So that's why we don't want to put these restrictive licenses on there. And that's why it's a bad thing when they have these financial incentives to get the more, to buy the more restrictive license. So, yeah.
Well, I'm glad that came out in the open.
Yes, yeah. All right, let's go back here. So funding. Let's go down to funding. So we're all interested in getting more funding for our research, especially in this kind of highly competitive environment. So we know that a lot of funders in the US, National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, in the EU, I think also in the UK, you have mandates from a lot of these funders, Wellcome Trust being one example. They require you to publish your articles openly within some time frame, and some of them even require you to share your data. So I think increasingly it's going to be necessary for researchers to start implementing these open practices as a way of getting and maintaining their funding, right? If you start now, you have that competitive edge. But here's another competitive edge. So we put together a table of some funders that are specifically funding open science efforts, Shuttleworth Foundation being one. OpenCon, we have travel scholarships and small project scholarships sometimes. Open Science Prize that was recently instituted by the Wellcome Trust, NIH, and HHMI. So all of these projects, it's not just an afterthought. It needs to be a central part of the project that you are openly sharing these materials and that they will stay open after the project has completed. So again, this is another way that you can get an edge up and you can tap into resources that you might not otherwise be able to tap into just by sharing your work. And so, of course, we needed an image for this. And here we are. So we'd always like to think that the money just comes raining down, right? And so again, this page has information on a lot of the funder mandates, but also on those new funding mechanisms coming out that are specifically rewarding open science. And I think that's a great trend, and I hope that we'll increasingly see funders rewarding those types of practices. All right, let's see. What else do we have here? We said resource management. So an increasing concern for funders is that these resources are properly managed, properly preserved, and that big R word, reproducible. So lately, in the last few years especially, we've seen some large-scale efforts in psychology and now in cancer biology to reproduce key studies in the field. And the results have been quite depressing, I guess is the word, that a very small percentage of these studies are reproducible, especially just taking the information from the published articles. A lot of these articles now, what we're seeing is the method section gets pushed all the way to the end. It's kind of a footnote. Oh, maybe online we have a little bit of extra information. But it's not sufficient for these researchers to go out and reproduce the results. And when we try to contact researchers, a large percentage of those just don't respond. and they don't want to get involved in the reproducibility process, and that's a shame. So research funders are getting increasingly concerned about this. At conferences, this is one way we've been getting open on the agenda. So you are never going to have a conference entitled, "Oh, the importance of open access," almost never, at a scientific conference, but you will have sessions on how can we make our science more reproducible, right? Or the rigor of science, how can we increase the rigor and transparency? So that's one way we're getting open on the agenda. Last year I spoke at the Society for Neuroscience, which has not historically been very open, let's put it that way. And they certainly never had open science on the agenda. And last year they put it on the agenda as part of a reproducibility panel. So this was a huge jump for us, a huge kind of step forward. So, but this isn't just reproducibility for people working outside your lab. This is for inside your lab. So how many of you arrived to a lab and had to dissect somebody else's code or dissect somebody else's protocol and spent like a year on this? Yeah, okay, right? A lot of people. So this is a lot of wasted time and money and hair pulling and screaming and swearing. It's not an efficient process. And so if we can have best practices at the level of our own lab, GitHub repositories that have our code under version control, where everybody can go in and check exactly what change was made when and by whom, then we're going to make our own internal process more reproducible. And I don't have to waste all that time to figure out, what on earth was I doing? What did that line of code do? Or, you know, what was I doing with my analysis? Or what did that grad student or postdoc do that left 5 years ago and the lab books have gathered this much dust? We want to avoid that type of inefficiency. And so these open practices that kind of extend to data management and preservation can help you do that. All right, so I am pretty much out of time. I want to just go back here and show you a couple quick things. Here on the YOpen Research page, we have resources. So one is an image gallery. And of course, all of our images and resources are openly licensed. So feel free to go and grab those and use them however you like. Our card sheets, we have a modifiable PDF template, so you can even change the messages if you'd like to put a different message on those cards and hand them out at events. We have, I say we, it's kind of just me working on this at this point, but it's like that we always use in science. We have FAQ sheets here. So one thing we hear a lot about is, well, yeah, I'd love to publish openly, but how do I pay for it? And there are actually a lot of different options. There are cost-free journals, low-cost journals. Your own institution probably has an open access fund, I would imagine. Or maybe a membership with a publisher that pays those fees. And then archiving is always free. Right? So we have a lot of these educational materials on the site. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. A lot more information in the article, but I will leave it and open it to questions. Thank you.